You've probably heard the name Geoffrey Chaucer, right? The father of English literature. But, that title, it wasn't just given to him. It was earned, forged over an entire lifetime of studying, traveling, and just relentlessly innovating. So this isn't going to be some stuffy history lesson. Nope. This is the story of how a master gets made.
It's a question anyone who's ever tried to create something asks themselves. And for Chaucer, the answer wasn't some sudden lightning bolt of genius. Not at all. It was a long, slow journey of learning, borrowing, and finally creating something totally new. We're going to follow that journey step by step. And to really get a handle on his evolution, we're going to break his career down into 3 acts. Think of it like the old guild system, but for a writer. He starts as the apprentice, learning the ropes. Then he becomes the journeyman, honing his skills. And finally, he becomes the master.
So here's the roadmap for his life's work. It all begins in France, where he basically learns the rules of the game from the literary heavyweights of the time. Then, a trip to Italy completely shatters those rules and opens his mind to a whole new world of possibilities. And finally, he comes back home to England to build something nobody had ever seen before.
Okay, let's dive into Act 1, the French apprenticeship. See, back in the 14th century, French was the language of high culture and poetry. If you wanted to be a serious writer, well, you had to learn from the French, period.
And that is exactly what Chaucer did. He didn't just jump in and try to reinvent the wheel. No, he started by taking the engine apart piece by piece to see how it worked. He dove headfirst into the works of poets like Guillaume de Machaut and started the long, hard work of translation.
His first really big project was translating the French bestseller of its day, the Roman de la Rose. And this thing is a wild ride. It's this complex, allegorical poem about a guy on a dream quest for a symbolic rose, complete with a fortress built by the character of jealousy. I mean, this wasn't just a simple homework assignment, this was his boot camp. By wrestling this massive story into English, he taught himself how to handle symbolism and complicated plots, skills he would use for the rest of his career.
So after he learned by copying, he was finally ready to create something of his own. And his first big step as an original artist was an elegy, a powerful, serious poem of mourning.
And that brings us to the Book of the Duchess. This poem was a really big deal. He's still using that French dream vision style he'd been studying, but now he's pouring real, raw, personal grief into it for a patron. He's not just an apprentice copying the masters anymore. He's starting to find his own voice.
So the apprentice has found his voice. But now, as a journeyman, a trip to Italy is about to completely change the song he's singing.
Picture this. It's 1372. Chaucer's on a diplomatic mission to Italy, and he walks right into a literary explosion. It's the dawn of the Renaissance. He discovers the epic genius of Dante, the emotional depth of Petrarch, and the incredible storytelling of Boccaccio. It was like he'd been painting in black and white his whole life, and someone suddenly handed him a full palette of colors.
And that Italian spark just lit a creative firestorm. He kicked off his most productive period, pumping out a series of unbelievably ambitious poems. And each one was pushing the boundaries a little bit further, all leading up to what some people call his greatest single work, the epic romance, Troilus and Criseyde.
Now, this is where we really see the journeyman become a master. He actually borrowed the plot for Troilus and Criseyde directly from an Italian writer, Boccaccio. But he didn't just translate it. Oh no. He rebuilt it from the ground up. He added deep psychological insight, wove in complex philosophy about free will, and even had the narrator talk directly to the audience. He took a simple romance and turned it into this profound exploration of the human heart. And right at the end of the poem, he gives a little shout out to his friend and fellow poet, John Gower. This wasn't just him being nice. It was a sign that a real English literary scene was starting to form, with Chaucer putting himself right at the heart of it. During this time, Chaucer also perfected a new piece of poetic tech, the Heroic Couplet. It's a really simple, elegant form, just 2 rhyming lines with a nice, steady rhythm, but in his hands, it became this incredibly flexible and powerful tool. It was the engine he was going to use to build his masterpiece. Which brings us to the final act, the master. He's learned from the French, he's been inspired by the Italians, and now Chaucer was ready to create something that was uniquely, powerfully, and unapologetically English. He took everything he had learned, the allegories, the romances, the deep psychology, the big philosophical questions, and he aimed it all like a camera lens right at the world around him, and the result was the Canterbury Tales. 32.
That's the number of pilgrims on the road to Canterbury. 32 completely different voices from every single corner of society. I mean, the ambition here is just breathtaking. Chaucer wasn't just writing one story. He was trying to capture an entire society in a single epic frame.
And he organized this massive cast of characters using the medieval idea of the three estates. You had the nobility, who fought, the church, who prayed, and the commoners, who worked. By giving us everyone from the perfect noble knight to the rowdy, vulgar miller, he created this incredible panorama of 14th century England.
But he wasn't just holding up a mirror. He was also making a point. Amidst all the hilarious portraits of corrupt and foolish pilgrims, 4 characters stand out as being, well, perfect: the knight, the parson, the clerk, and the plowman. These are his ideals. They represent the best of their class, and they give us a little peek into Chaucer's own moral compass.
So after this incredible journey from apprentice to master, we're left with his legacy. And the funny thing is, it's kind of defined by what he didn't finish.
What's really fascinating is that the Canterbury Tales was never actually finished. He had plans for way more stories, but you know what? In the end, it didn't even matter. His real masterpiece wasn't finishing the project. It was what he created along the way, a living, breathing, hilarious, and tragic picture of his world.
And this is why he gets that big title. Before Chaucer, if you wanted to write something truly great, you used Latin or French. He took English, the everyday language of regular people, and proved it could be a language for profound, beautiful, and lasting art. He didn't just write in English, he elevated it.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. His genius was capturing a perfect cross-section of his society on a journey together. So, if he were writing the Canterbury Tales today, who would be his pilgrims? Who'd be on that bus, or that train, or that plane? A tech billionaire? A barista? A politician? A TikTok influencer? It really makes you stop and think about who we are now, doesn't it?